The January cold bit through every layer of clothing, turning breath into visible clouds and fingers into numb sticks. Grace Bennett sat on the concrete bench outside Memorial Hospital. Her 3-year-old daughter Maya pressed against her side, both of them trying to share what little warmth they had. Grace wore a gray jacket that had seen better years. Her blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Maya, bundled in a red coat over a pink dress, her hair in 2 pigtails, clutched her mother's hand and asked the same question she'd been asking for the past 20 minutes. "Mommy, when can we go inside?" "I'm cold." "Soon, sweetheart," Grace said, though she had no idea if that was true. "We just need to wait a little longer." They'd been at the hospital since early morning. Maya had been running a fever for 3 days, and this morning she'd complained that her ear hurt so badly she couldn't stop crying. Grace, who'd been working double shifts as a waitress to make ends meet since her husband left them 18 months ago, had no health insurance. She'd brought Maya to the emergency room, sat through 4 hours of waiting, seen a doctor for 10 minutes, received a prescription for antibiotics. That would cost $70. She didn't have, and been told to come back if the fever didn't break in 48 hours. The prescription sat in Grace's pocket like a weight. $70 might as well have been $700. She'd done the math on the bus ride from the hospital pharmacy. Back to the hospital, if she didn't fill the prescription, she could buy groceries for the next week and make rent. If she filled it, they'd eat, but they'd be short on rent again. And their landlord had already warned her that one more late payment meant eviction. So she'd come back to the hospital, hoping to plead with someone, anyone, to help, to explain that her daughter needed medicine and she simply didn't have the money. But the financial aid office was closed until Monday. Today was Friday, and the social worker had given her a list of resources that all required applications and processing time. Maya's ear infection didn't have, which left Grace sitting on a bench outside the hospital in January, trying to figure out what to do while her daughter shivered against her and asked questions she couldn't answer. "Mommy, my ear really hurts," Maya whimpered. "I know, baby, I know. We're going to make it better, I promise." Grace pulled Maya closer, blinking back tears. She was 29 years old, and she'd somehow failed at the most basic task of parenthood, keeping her child healthy and safe. A shadow fell across them. Grace looked up to see a man standing before them, probably in his early 40s, wearing an expensive dark suit with a white dress shirt open at the collar, his dark hair neatly styled. Everything about him spoke of success and authority. The watch on his wrist probably cost more than Grace made in 6 months, and his Italian leather shoes had never seen a bus floor. "Excuse me," he said, his voice deep and surprisingly gentle. "I don't mean to intrude, but I couldn't help noticing you've been sitting out here for quite a while. Are you waiting for someone?" Grace stiffened, immediately defensive. She'd learned the hard way that people who looked like this man, wealthy, powerful, put together, rarely approached people like her with good intentions. They asked questions so they could feel better about themselves, or they made judgments about her parenting, or they called security to move along the people, who made the hospital entrance look less pristine. "We're fine," she said shortly. "Thank you." The man looked at Maya, who was pressing her hand against her ear and trying not to cry. Then he looked back at Grace, and there was something in his expression, concern, perhaps, or recognition of pain he understood. "May I sit down?" he asked, gesturing to the bench. Grace wanted to say no, wanted to tell him to go away, to leave them alone, to stop looking at them with that careful expression that suggested he saw exactly how desperate they were. But she was too tired to be rude, and Maya was leaning heavily against her, small body radiating heat from the fever. "It's a public bench," Grace said. The man sat down, maintaining a respectful distance. Up close, Grace could see the concern in his dark eyes, the way he looked at Maya with what seemed like genuine worry. "I'm Michael Hartford," he said. "I work here at the hospital." Of course he did. Probably some administrator or specialist, someone who made 6 figures, while people like Grace sat outside, trying to figure out how to afford basic medical care. "Good for you," Grace said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Michael didn't react to her tone. Instead, he looked at Maya again. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Maya looked up at her mother for permission. Grace nodded slightly, and Maya said shyly, "Maya, I'm 3 years old. My ear hurts really bad. I'm sorry to hear that, Michael said seriously, as if Maya were an adult deserving of his full respect. Ear infections are very painful. Have you seen a doctor? Yes, Maya said. But Mommy's sad because the medicine costs too much money. Grace felt her face burn with shame. The honest, unfiltered observation of a 3-year-old, laying bare their situation for this wealthy stranger to judge. Maya, hush, Grace said softly. But Michael was looking at Grace now, understanding dawning in his expression. You can't afford the prescription. It wasn't a question. Grace felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. She would not cry in front of this man. She would not fall apart on a bench outside a hospital while her daughter watched. We'll manage, she said, her voice tight. How? Michael asked gently. I'm not judging you. I'm genuinely asking. If you can't afford the medication, how will you manage? Grace felt something break inside her. The careful wall she'd built to protect herself from pity and judgment, from the weight of all the ways she was failing as a mother. I don't know, she whispered. I've been sitting here for 30 minutes, trying to figure out how to pay for medicine my daughter needs. I don't have health insurance because I work 2 waitressing jobs that both keep me just under full-time hours so they don't have to provide benefits. I make too much to qualify for immediate government assistance, but not enough to actually live on. And I'm out of options and ideas, so yes, I'm sitting on a bench outside a hospital trying to figure out how to keep my daughter from getting sicker, while also keeping a roof over our heads. The words spilled out in a rush, months of pressure and fear and exhaustion finding their release. Grace immediately regretted it, expecting Michael to make his excuses and leave, to decide this was too much mess and complication for a Friday afternoon. Instead, he did something completely unexpected. He pulled out his phone, made a call and said, Jennifer, it's Michael Hartford. I need you to call down to the hospital pharmacy and tell them to fill a prescription for Maya Bennett. Yes, immediately. Put it on my personal account. No, not the hospital foundation. My personal account. Thank you. He hung up and looked at Grace, who was staring at him in shock. What's the medication? Grace fumbled the prescription from her pocket with shaking hands. Michael glanced at it, made another call, and within 5 minutes had arranged for the medication to be filled and delivered to them at the bench, all paid for. I don't understand, Grace said, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. Why would you do that? You don't know us. Michael was quiet for a moment, watching Maya, who had perked up slightly, sensing that something good was happening even if she didn't fully understand what. Can I tell you a story? He asked. Grace nodded, unable to speak. 25 years ago, my mother sat on a bench very similar to this one, outside a different hospital, with me and my younger sister. We were 7 and 5. My father had left us 6 months earlier. My sister had pneumonia, and my mother couldn't afford the medication. She'd been crying, trying to figure out what to do, when a doctor who was leaving his shift stopped and asked if she was okay. Michael's voice grew distant with memory. That doctor sat down, listened to her story, and paid for the medication. Then he helped my mother apply for programs that eventually got us health care coverage. He checked on us for months afterward, made sure we were okay. He changed our entire trajectory. What happened to him? Grace asked softly. He became my mentor. He's the reason I went to medical school, the reason I specialized in emergency medicine, the reason I eventually became CEO of this hospital. He showed me that medicine isn't just about treating illness. It's about seeing people, about understanding that health doesn't exist in a vacuum, that someone can do everything right and still end up desperate and scared on a bench outside a hospital. You're the CEO? Grace said, suddenly understanding the expensive suit. The phone call that made things happen immediately. I am, Michael confirmed. I've been CEO here for 5 years, and in those 5 years, I've tried to implement the kind of compassion that doctor showed my mother. But clearly, we're not doing enough. If mothers are still sitting outside, trying to figure out how to afford prescriptions for their children. A pharmacy technician appeared carrying a white paper bag. Mr. Hartford? The prescription for Maya Bennett. Michael took the bag and handed it to Grace. The full course of antibiotics. There are also instructions for managing pain and fever. Follow them carefully. If Maya's not better in 48 hours or if she gets worse, I want you to bring her back to the emergency room immediately. Ask for me personally. I'll make sure she's seen. Grace clutched the bag, looking between the medication and Michael's face. I can't repay you. I don't know when I'd ever be able to. I'm not asking for repayment, Michael interrupted gently. But I am going to ask you to do something for me. Grace tensed, waiting for the catch. The condition? The thing that would make this kindness turn complicated. I want you to fill out an application for our financial assistance program. Jennifer, my assistant, who you'll meet, she'll help you with the paperwork. It can get you coverage for Maya's health care and potentially for yours as well. It's not charity. It's a program we've set up specifically for working families who fall through the gaps in the system. Why? Grace asked. Why are you doing this? Michael looked at her directly, and she saw in his eyes the echo of that 7-year-old boy on a bench with his mother, scared and uncertain. Because someone did it for us. Because Maya deserves to feel better, and you deserve not to have to choose between medicine and rent. And because I built this hospital to serve everyone, not just people who can easily afford care. If you're sitting outside in January, trying to figure out how to help your sick daughter, then I failed in my mission. Maya tugged on Michael's sleeve. Thank you for helping my mommy. She's been very sad. Michael's expression softened. You're very welcome, Maya. Your mother is very brave, and she loves you very much. I know, Maya said seriously. She tells me every day. Grace felt tears streaming down her face, unable to hold them back any longer. Thank you, she managed. You have no idea what this means. I have some idea, Michael said quietly. He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to Grace. My direct number is on here. If you have any trouble with the application process, or if Maya needs anything, you call me anytime. I mean that. Over the following weeks, Grace worked with Jennifer to complete the financial assistance application. The process was surprisingly straightforward, and within 10 days, Maya had health coverage through the hospital's program. Grace also qualified for reduced-rate coverage, and Jennifer connected her with resources for job training programs and better employment opportunities. But more than the practical help, what stayed with Grace was the memory of Michael Hartford sitting on that bench, choosing to spend his time with a desperate mother and sick child, when he could have walked past, could have delegated, could have decided it wasn't his problem. Maya's ear infection cleared up within 3 days of starting the antibiotics. Grace kept the empty prescription bottle on her bathroom, counter as a reminder, not of their lowest moment, but of the kindness that had met them there. 2 months after that January afternoon, Grace was called to Michael's office. She was nervous, wondering if there was a problem with the assistance program, if somehow she'd done something wrong. Instead, Michael offered her a position in the hospital's patient advocacy department. We need people who understand what our patients are going through, he explained. People who've been in their shoes, who know what it's like to navigate the system from a place of desperation and fear. You'd be helping families like yours, connecting them with resources, walking them through the financial assistance process, making sure they don't fall through the cracks. Grace stared at him. I'm a waitress with no college degree. I'm not qualified for a hospital position. You're a mother who survived impossible circumstances while taking care of a child. You understand systems and resilience and creative problem solving. We'll train you in the specifics. The real qualifications, compassion, determination, lived experience, those you already have. Why would you do this? Grace asked. You've already done so much. Because that doctor who helped my mother didn't just pay for medication. He helped her find a better job, helped her build a stable life. He understood that one-time help, while important, isn't enough. Real change requires sustained support. Michael smiled. Also, you impressed Jennifer with how thoroughly and carefully you filled out that application. She said you asked questions that showed you were thinking about other families who might need help, not just your own situation. That's exactly the mindset we need. Grace took the job. It came with health benefits, stable hours that allowed her to be present for Maya, and a salary that meant she no longer had to choose between medicine and rent, between groceries and utilities. But more than that, it gave her purpose. She spent her days helping families navigate the system that had once seemed so impenetrable to her. She sat with worried mothers in emergency room waiting areas. She held hands with fathers, trying to hold themselves together while their children were sick. She filled out paperwork and made phone calls and fought with insurance companies and did whatever it took to make sure that no one had to sit on a bench outside the hospital, holding a prescription they couldn't afford, feeling like they'd failed their child. 1 year after that January afternoon, Grace organized a fundraiser for the hospital's financial assistance program. Michael attended, of course, and brought with him an elderly man Grace hadn't met before. "Grace, this is Dr. James Chen," Michael said. "The doctor I told you about. The one who helped my mother." Dr. Chen, now retired and in his 70s, shook Grace's hand warmly. "Michael tells me you've been doing remarkable work, helping families the way he once helped mine. I'm very proud of what you've both built." "You started it," Grace said. "That day you stopped to help. Michael's mother, you created ripples that are still spreading. Maya and I are proof of that." Dr. Chen's eyes grew misty. "I simply couldn't walk past someone who needed help. It's what we're supposed to do. See each other, care for each other. I had no idea it would lead to all of this." "That's the thing about kindness," Michael said, looking between them. "You never know what it might grow into." Dr. Chen sat down with my mother for 30 minutes on a cold afternoon and changed the trajectory of our entire lives. I sat down with Grace for 30 minutes on a cold afternoon, and now she's helping hundreds of families every year. Each act of compassion multiplies. The fundraiser was a success, raising enough money to expand the financial assistance program significantly. Grace gave a speech, telling her story, the fear, the desperation, the shame of sitting outside a hospital, unable to afford medication for her sick daughter, and then the kindness of a stranger who chose to sit down instead of walking past, who chose to see her instead of looking away. I don't know where Maya and I would be if Michael Hartford hadn't stopped that day, Grace said to the crowd. I was out of options, out of hope, out of energy. I felt like I'd failed at the most basic job of being a mother. But someone saw me in that moment and decided I was worth helping, not because I deserved it or had earned it, but simply because I was a human being in need and he had the power to help. After the event, Grace found Michael standing at a window overlooking the hospital entrance. She could see the bench where they'd sat that January afternoon, now occupied by someone else, another person waiting, hoping, figuring things out. "Do you ever wonder how many people we're missing?" Grace asked, joining him at the window. "How many people sitting on benches we don't see?" "Every day," Michael admitted. "That's why I'm so grateful you're here. You see them, Grace, because you've been them. You know what to look for, what questions to ask, how to reach people who are trying very hard not to be seen because they're ashamed of needing help." "I was so ashamed that day," Grace said quietly. "I felt like such a failure." "You weren't a failure. You were a mother dealing with an impossible system, doing your absolute best in circumstances that weren't your fault." Michael turned to face her. "I need you to understand something. Grace, what happened that day, me stopping, me helping, that wasn't charity or pity. It was recognition. I saw my mother in you. I saw myself in Maya. I understood. In a way most people in my position couldn't. Exactly what you were going through. That understanding created obligation. Not legal obligation, but moral obligation. How could I walk past when I had the power to help?" "Not everyone would have stopped," Grace pointed out. "No, they wouldn't. Which is why we need to change the system so that help doesn't depend on random encounters with compassionate strangers. Everyone deserves access to health care. Everyone deserves not to have to choose between medicine and rent. That's what we're building here. A system that doesn't rely on luck or charity, but provides dignity and care as a baseline." 3 years after that January afternoon, Grace was promoted to Director of Patient Advocacy and Community Outreach. She'd expanded the program to include mental health services, addiction support, and resources for families experiencing homelessness. Maya, now 6 years old and thriving, occasionally came to work with her mother during school breaks, coloring at Grace's desk while her mother helped families navigate crises. Maya didn't remember being sick that January day, didn't remember the fear or the cold or sitting on a bench, while her mother tried not to cry. But she'd grown up hearing the story, understanding that their lives had changed, because someone had chosen kindness over convenience. "When I grow up, I want to help people like you and Mr. Hartford,"